The Boston Bruins make a big deal at the trade deadline, follow it up with a big contract extension. Ian McLaren of Locked On Bruins joins us to discuss this and all things Bruins at the trade deadline.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. Gil Martin, glad to be with you. Thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. Right now, it's my pleasure to welcome back to the show Ian McLaren of Locked On Boston Bruins. Ian, how are you?
I'm doing well, Gil. How are you?
I am good. Big move by the Bruins. They acquired defenseman Hampus Lindholm from the Ducks, and then within 24 hours of acquiring him, they signed him to an 8-year extension with an average cap hit of $6.5 million per year. Your thoughts on this deal, what they gave up, and the value to the Boston Bruins?
Yeah, I guess we'll start with the value to the Bruins. A left-hand defenseman, top pair left-hand defenseman is something that this team has been in need of for, a couple of years, ever since Zdeno Chara and Torrey Krug both left the organization. And although Matt Grzelcyk has played well with Charlie McAvoy, Hampus Lindholm steps in with the ability to play in all situations. He can play on either pairing with McAvoy or Brandon Carlo. And he's not just a rental, like you mentioned. He's signed for the next 8 seasons at a cap hit of $6.5 million. They did give up, some pretty sizable assets, a first-round pick in 2022, a second-round pick in 2023 and 2024, as well as promising young defenseman Urho Vakanainen, who was a first-round pick just a few years ago. One of those second-round picks was added to the deal to entice Anaheim to take John Moore's contract. He was under contract for one more season. Overall, they gave up some assets, some futures for this one, but they get a steady, reliable, top pair defenseman who can help them now and for years to come in return. And overall, a win, I would say, for Don Sweeney and company on this trade for sure.
How much of that assessment changed when the extension was signed?
Yeah, that was pretty key. I think when people first heard about the trade, knowing that Hampus Lindholm was an unrestricted free agent, that would have been a lot to give up just for a rental player. So the hope was that there was an extension, perhaps not attached to the deal, but coming at some point. And it was reported by some pretty locked-in insiders relatively shortly after the deal was announced that the two sides were indeed working on an extension. And that security, knowing that he's going to be a mainstay on the blue line for, almost the next decade, made giving up those draft picks and Vakanainen a bit more palatable for sure.
Who on the Bruins' current roster will see their playing time cut the most as a result of this deal?
Oh, that's a great question. The Bruins are pretty left side heavy at the moment. They have, I already mentioned Matt Grzelcyk. Now with Hampus Lindholm in the top 4, that bumps out a Mike Riley or Derek Forbort from the top 6 on the left side. They also have Connor Clifton playing on the right side. And Bruce Cassidy has already said on Sunday that the top 4 is set, and then the bottom pairing, it will be Forbort, Riley, who both just signed with the Bruins this past offseason, they'll be fighting with Connor Clifton for, those three guys will be fighting for the bottom pair spots. And it puts the Bruins in a position where they might have two lefties playing on the bottom pair. Not something that's unheard of, that they've never done before. But in the immediate future, one of those guys who's been a regular in the lineup will be out once Lindholm makes his debut with the Bruins, which won't be Monday in Montreal. He's going to join the team later this week and likely be in the lineup Thursday against the Tampa Bay Lightning.
And how do you see the Bruins utilizing Lindholm?
Yeah, he's a guy. He's a guy that can be used in all situations. He doesn't blow anybody away necessarily offensively. He might not get a load of power play time. This might allow them to free up a guy like Grzelcyk to take on a more of a power play role, but he'll certainly play on the penalty kill. He's a very talented and effective player at even strength. So he's going to play, he's going to carry heavy minutes, 5-on-5, killing penalties. There has been a pretty big gap between, say, Charlie McAvoy, their clear number one defenseman, in terms of ice time, and guys who are a bit down. This will kind of lessen the burden on McAvoy to carry the load defensively and spread the ice time around a little bit as well. It's worth noting that Lindholm, his game has dropped off this year, perhaps last season, relative to earlier in his career, but he had been paired with a 19-year-old in Jamie Drysdale in Anaheim. So he will no longer, not that Drysdale isn't a highly regarded prospect, but Lindholm will now get the opportunity to play with more of a bona fide number one guy at this time, and that should help elevate his game as well for the Boston Bruins.
What, if any, other moves do you expect the Bruins to make by tomorrow's trade deadline?
I think they still probably will be pretty active. I think that the second line center hole is still something that needs to be rectified, whether or not it's before the deadline or in the off season. David Krejci has made it clear that he has no plan to come back. He's happy over in Czechia with his family. Eric Haula has been filling that role pretty well in recent weeks, but still, I'd like to see them do something there. They could use some help on the wing, scoring right winger, most specifically, and then perhaps a bit more depth on the blue line. You can never have too much of that when you go into the playoffs. So I think, if they could get someone who can play center and possibly play on the wing at the same time, a guy who can flip between those two roles and add some offense, they could add that. A guy like Connor Garland, I think, would be near the top of their list as to guys who could fill that role.
All right, Ian, thanks so much. Why don't you tell our listeners and our viewers where they could find you and the podcast and social media as well?
Yeah, everybody, Bruins fans, can follow along Locked On Boston Bruins. You can search that up on your podcast app and subscribe on YouTube as well. The podcast on Twitter is at Locked NHL Bruins, and people can find me at Ian C. McLaren.
All right, Ian, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah, thanks so much, Gil. Take care.